Hi friends, it's Rabbi Briskin with a thought for Shabbat. You may be able to see behind me, I've got a stack of chumashim, of Torah commentaries and translations that I want to refer to today as I look at just the first three Hebrew words of the Torah. This week we begin Parashat Breshit, which is the book of Genesis, the very first chapters. We oftentimes think of the words, in the beginning God created, right? Breshit bara Elohim is the Hebrew, but often translated as in the beginning. But as I've often taught my students and what we generally know, all translations are interpretations. So for example, in the 5 Books of Moses by Everett Fox, he writes, not in the beginning, but at the beginning of God's creating of the heavens and earth. And in Robert Alter's translation, he writes, when God began to create heaven and earth. Or Richard Elliott Friedman's commentary, in the beginning of God's creating the skies and the earth. And finally, the Torah, the Women's Commentary, when God was about to create heaven and earth. Now, although each of these translations are different, they share one thing in common. They assume that God already existed. When God began to create, at the beginning of God's creating of. It's this idea that God was here before God started creating the universe. How we understand our relationship with God, how we understand our relationship with text, varies across a wide spectrum of belief and ideology. But I just want to share one thought from Roger Price in his book, When Judaism Meets Science. Roger Price, by the way, will be our Lunch and Learn scholar next Tuesday. He writes this. When the Torah starts telling its history of the Israelite nation, God already exists. There is no discussion of God's origins or what, if anything, God may have been doing previously. God simply just is and proceeds with the work of creation. So, something to think about this Shabbat is how do we wrestle with this idea that God preceded creation? Is that what we believe? Or do we believe that creation and God appeared at the same time? Even when we read the first chapters of the book of Genesis, Parashat Breshit, it says, when God began to create, we don't, just God appears. There's no description of who or what God is or any attributes. It's just God is. So in Judaism, we take God for granted. But not everyone does take God for granted. We struggle with our belief in God, how we relate to God. Is God way out there in the cosmos, trying to keep the universe in order? Is God deep within? The beauty about Judaism and our relationship with God is that there are so many different pathways to experience God, if we believe, and so many ways to feel God's presence in our lives. Sometimes we feel close to God, sometimes distant. But one thing that Genesis does teach us is that God was here before anything else was here, and that the work of creation continues to evolve each and every day. So friends, I hope that you can continue to experience God's presence in your lives, or perhaps you can work to bring God into your life if you don't feel that presence quite yet. Either way, I imagine that when we have that sense of presence and being and belonging, we will feel more greatly connected. So friends, I wish you a Shabbat Shalom, and look forward to seeing you online for Shabbat services on Zoom only, Friday night at 7 o'clock now, new time, 7 o'clock. Shabbat Shalom.